My mom insisted I bring my boyfriend to Thanksgiving, but when I arrived, I found out she had only invited him to make me look bad in front of everyone. My mom insisted I bring my boyfriend to Thanksgiving, but when I arrived, I found out she had only invited him to make me look bad in front of everyone. I knew something felt off the moment I stepped into my mom's house that Thanksgiving morning. She had insisted I bring my boyfriend, Daniel, and at first I thought it was just her usual way of trying to appear welcoming. But the air was heavy, too forced, and the smell of roasted turkey and pumpkin pie could not mask the tension that seemed to cling to every corner. I, 27, had spent the last few weeks trying to enjoy the holiday season without thinking about my mom's tendency to turn every family gathering into a competition, but today, something told me this would be different. Daniel walked behind me, carrying a bottle of wine he had picked up on the way over, smiling politely and chatting about small things, unaware that the warm smiles and pleasantries I was receiving were designed to catch me off guard. As soon as we entered, my younger brother, Caleb, appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel and giving Daniel a particularly sharp look. I had known Caleb since birth and I knew that glance. It was the one he used when he thought he had figured out a secret or when he believed he had me cornered. My mom was hovering near the doorway, smiling widely but too tightly, and she gestured toward the living room where the rest of the family was gathered. Something in her eyes told me she was enjoying a private joke, one I wasn't yet privy to. Daniel followed me in, still smiling, completely unaware, and I felt the first stirrings of that uncomfortable pit in my stomach that meant trouble. We made our way past the dining table, which was set beautifully with fine china and sparkling silverware. The smell of the stuffing mixed with roasted vegetables hit me and momentarily distracted me from my suspicion, but not for long. I noticed subtle things that felt off. Plates were set differently than usual, forks on the wrong side, napkins folded in an unusually rigid way. My uncle, Henry, who usually teased me relentlessly about my awkwardness, didn't greet me at all, simply nodding curtly. My cousins were clustered in the corner, whispering and glancing toward Daniel with barely contained smirks. I tried to shake it off, but something about their behavior made my skin crawl. As we reached the dining room, my mom leaned close to me and whispered that Daniel should sit at the end of the table next to me. I glanced at her and tried to read her expression. There was pride there, but also a glint of mischief I could not place. I looked around and noticed my dad seated at the head of the table, giving me a faint nod. It was subtle, but it was like a signal, though I wasn't sure whether it was supportive or a warning. We sat down and my mom began distributing the food with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Then I saw it. The way everyone else was positioned, the way chairs were angled slightly toward Daniel as if he were the main act in some silent performance. The way Caleb's eyes darted toward me every few seconds as though daring me to respond to whatever punchline was coming. It clicked just as my mom began her carefully rehearsed toast. I realized that Daniel hadn't been invited to be welcomed or celebrated. He had been invited as a tool, a prop to make me look awkward, inexperienced, or out of place in front of the whole family. Every smile directed at him, every compliment, every casual question about his job or hobbies was calculated to highlight him as the center of attention while I sat on the sidelines, unsure whether to laugh, smile, or fume. I felt my face heat up, my hands clenching slightly under the table. Daniel, blissfully unaware, was answering questions with charm and confidence, completely missing the tension, while I struggled to maintain composure. As the family continued, subtle digs began to emerge. Comments about how long it had taken me to settle into my job, remarks about how Daniel's career seemed more impressive than mine, even playful suggestions that I had to step up if I wanted to keep up with him. I could feel every eye in the room following my reactions, gauging my discomfort. I tried to focus on the food, on small talk, anything to distract myself, but it was impossible. My mom's careful orchestration was seamless and cruel. Every laugh from the cousins, every subtle nod or glance from relatives, all synchronized to make me feel out of place and incompetent, while Daniel continued to smile and answer as if he were in a completely different, harmless world. By the time the first course was cleared, I knew I had to choose. I could sit there and let my mom continue orchestrating this spectacle, allowing her to manipulate the room and highlight my discomfort, or I could act, even if it meant causing tension. Even if it meant shattering the polished facade she had built. My hand brushed against Daniel's under the table, a silent signal that something was wrong, and I could see the confusion cross his face as he sensed the shift in energy. He didn't yet understand the stakes, the hidden games that had been played at my expense, but I knew I had to protect both of us from being pawns in my mother's performance. I glanced around the table one last time before making my move. My dad raised an eyebrow slightly, Caleb smirked, and my mom's eyes widened for the briefest moment before regaining composure. I knew the next few minutes would define how this evening played out and whether I would let my mother dictate my feelings, my pride, and my confidence in front of everyone else. I took a deep breath, preparing to reclaim control over the night and to make it clear that I would no longer be the subject of subtle humiliation, no matter how cleverly it was orchestrated. I shifted slightly in my seat, signaling Daniel to follow my lead, though I could tell he still didn't fully understand the tension. My mom, noticing the change in my demeanor, tried to steer the conversation back toward her planned narrative, commenting on Daniel's career achievements and comparing them subtly to mine. It was like a tightrope walk, each word crafted to highlight his successes while casting shadows over my own. My jaw tightened and I forced a casual laugh, knowing that the longer I allowed her to control the room, the more entrenched her plan would become. I decided I wouldn't let her manipulate this Thanksgiving into a performance at my expense. Caleb, sitting across from me, leaned back in his chair with a grin that said he was fully aware of the tension and enjoying it. He threw in small, pointed comments about my life choices, like how I had only recently settled into my apartment or how Daniel's new promotion was impressive compared to my modest raises. Every remark was designed to make me feel inadequate, to fuel the embarrassment that my mom seemed intent on cultivating. I took a deep breath, knowing that responding defensively would only give them the satisfaction they craved. Instead, I let the comments roll off, keeping my focus on Daniel and making sure he wasn't drawn into the trap. As the meal progressed, my mom's orchestration became more obvious. She positioned herself strategically between Daniel and me, asking him questions that forced him to elaborate in detail while leaving me minimal opportunity to speak. Her smiles were too wide, too forced, each compliment to him delivered with a subtle, sarcastic undertone that would be apparent to anyone paying close attention. I realized that she wasn't trying to be friendly. She was conducting a controlled demonstration, showing the family how she thought I fell short, how her favorite or preferred choices eclipsed mine. I felt a mix of frustration and disbelief. How could she turn this into a public display so meticulously planned? Then my Uncle Henry leaned in with his usual teasing, but this time the timing was deliberate. He asked Daniel about his recent vacation, prompting him to describe luxury accommodations and exotic meals. He glanced at me while Daniel spoke, as if expecting me to respond with a story of my own. The expectation was clear. My story should pale in comparison, my experiences insufficient to match the highlighted success of Daniel. I forced a smile, carefully neutral, and decided that if this was to be a contest, I would not play by their rules. I would take the narrative into my own hands. It became increasingly difficult to watch Daniel field these questions so graciously, unaware that he was being paraded like a prize, while I was expected to shrink into the background. I could feel my mom's satisfaction in orchestrating this display. She had managed to create an artificial hierarchy, positioning him as the ideal son-in-law while subtly undermining me at every opportunity. I noticed Caleb chuckling quietly to himself, glancing toward the cousins who were now whispering, the room filled with the quiet tension of an audience witnessing a performance that I was supposedly failing. I realized that if I didn't act soon, the evening would continue under her control, and my confidence, my dignity, and my relationship with Daniel could be undermined further. I set down my fork and leaned slightly forward, making sure my voice, when I finally spoke, would carry across the table. I told everyone that I appreciated their interest in Daniel, but I reminded them that this evening was about family and togetherness, not comparison or judgment. I emphasized that Daniel's achievements were his own and that my life, my choices, and my accomplishments were valid in their own right. My words drew surprised glances, especially from my mom, who had not anticipated confrontation. She shifted slightly, a micro-expression of frustration crossing her face before she masked it with another tight smile. Caleb's smirk faltered, and the cousins fell silent, realizing that the dynamic had shifted. The air changed, tense but no longer controlled entirely by her. Daniel, sensing my intention, reached for my hand beneath the table and squeezed gently, a silent reassurance that he was on my side. I continued, calmly but firmly, refusing to be drawn into defensive arguments or overt displays of emotion. I reminded the room that Thanksgiving was a celebration of gratitude and togetherness, not a stage for hidden rivalries or parental manipulation. My mom, momentarily speechless, tried to reassert control with casual remarks, but her tone lacked conviction. The careful choreography of humiliation she had planned was disrupted, and for the first time, I felt the room shift subtly back toward a more balanced dynamic. By the time the first round of dessert arrived, the tension had eased slightly. My mom continued to smile, but it no longer had the sharp edge of a performance designed to embarrass. Caleb had retreated into a quieter, more observational role, and the cousins, sensing the shift, became less focused on whispering and more engaged in neutral conversation. Daniel, relieved, finally relaxed his posture and joined in with lighter, more genuine conversation. I realized that by asserting myself and taking control of the narrative, I had interrupted the subtle but effective manipulation my mom had attempted, creating a small space where the evening could unfold without being entirely dictated by her intentions. As the evening progressed, the atmosphere slowly began to feel more balanced. But the undercurrent of my mom's plan still lingered. I could tell she was displeased that her subtle manipulation hadn't gone as smoothly as she had intended. Every glance she cast in my direction was sharper now, more scrutinizing, as if she were calculating her next move. Caleb, meanwhile, had retreated further into the background, though I could still feel the weight of his eyes whenever they flicked toward me. I realized that while the immediate battle had shifted, the war over perception was far from over. Daniel, sensing the residual tension, attempted to engage my mom in polite conversation, but her responses were clipped, almost rehearsed, as if she was carefully selecting her words to maintain her version of the narrative. I could see the subtle frustration in his expression, a mixture of confusion and hurt at not being fully welcomed despite the smiles and polite nods. I leaned slightly toward him under the table, giving a reassuring squeeze to his hand, silently telling him that he wasn't alone in this, that I was aware of the dynamics at play, and that we would navigate it together. I noticed that my cousins were still whispering, occasionally glancing toward us with expressions that suggested they were enjoying the drama more than the holiday itself. It struck me how easily people can be drawn into family power plays, how quickly they take sides when subtle manipulation is at work. I realized that the success of my mom's plan relied on silence and inaction on my part, on letting the room fall into her carefully constructed rhythm. By asserting myself earlier, I had disrupted that rhythm, but now I had to maintain my presence and ensure the balance didn't slip again. The second round of dessert arrived, a pie my mom had spent hours perfecting. She placed the slices in front of us with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, a faint glimmer of annoyance betraying her effort to maintain control. Caleb made a joke under his breath, directed at me, about how Daniel must be used to winning arguments with ease. I took a deep breath and responded with lightness, deflecting the remark without feeding into the tension. I could feel the room recalibrating around my behavior. My mom's subtle manipulation was losing its power because I was no longer playing the role she had assigned me. Daniel, encouraged by my response, began sharing stories from his work and travel experiences in a more relaxed manner. I joined in, providing context and anecdotes from my own life, carefully choosing moments that highlighted shared humor and genuine connection rather than competition. The cousins, initially smirking, started listening more attentively, and a few even chuckled at our stories. I could feel the shift in the room, a subtle easing of the rigid roles my mom had tried to enforce. The more Daniel and I engaged together, the less effective her manipulation became, and I sensed her growing frustration. After a while, my mom attempted to regain control by asking a pointed question about Daniel's future plans, designed to draw attention back to his achievements and indirectly highlight my supposed shortcomings. I responded calmly, acknowledging his goals while also emphasizing my own ongoing projects and accomplishments. I spoke with clarity and confidence, ensuring that my words reflected authenticity rather than defensiveness. My approach seemed to surprise her and even some of the family members who had expected me to stumble or retreat into silence. By the time the main courses were cleared, the tension had reduced significantly. Daniel and I had created a subtle but firm boundary, making it clear that we were equals in presence and voice, and that attempts to manipulate perception would not go unchecked. My mom's attempts to control the narrative were faltering, her carefully rehearsed comments met with balanced responses and genuine interaction rather than submission. Caleb, still present but quieter, no longer seemed eager to needle me, perhaps realizing that the strategy to embarrass me was no longer viable. As the evening drew on, I began to feel a cautious sense of relief. While I knew my mom's need to dominate and manipulate wasn't likely to vanish, I had successfully interrupted her control for at least one gathering. Daniel, relaxed now, leaned back in his chair with a small smile, and I could see he appreciated the subtle signals and support I had provided. I felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that I had not allowed the evening to become a stage for humiliation and comparison. Instead, it had shifted, slowly but surely, into a space where genuine interaction and connection could take place, even amidst the lingering tension of familial expectations. By the time the coffee and final desserts were served, the atmosphere had shifted enough that I could finally breathe. Daniel and I had established an unspoken alliance, a mutual understanding that no matter what subtle games my mom tried to play, we would not be caught off guard. I realized that our success wasn't about confrontation alone, it was about presence, about asserting ourselves quietly but firmly, and showing the family that we would not be passive participants in someone else's spectacle. My mom, though still maintaining her poised smile, seemed to sense the change in control, And for the first time in years, I felt like I had leveled the playing field. After clearing the plates, I suggested a small walk outside to enjoy the crisp air, wanting to give Daniel a reprieve from the lingering tension and to process the afternoon together. He nodded, appreciating the break from the orchestrated dynamics inside. As we stepped onto the porch, I felt the weight of the earlier hours lift slightly. The sounds of laughter and conversation from inside the house were now less intimidating, less controlled, and I realized that we had created a small but meaningful space of autonomy. We walked in silence for a few minutes, the kind of calm that comes after asserting boundaries and knowing you have been heard. Returning inside, I noticed subtle shifts in the room. My cousins were chatting more openly, no longer whispering conspiratorially. Caleb remained nearby, but his posture had softened, and he no longer attempted to needle me with small jabs. Even my mom's demeanor had changed, a quiet tension in her shoulders betraying the fact that her attempts to dominate the evening had been met with resistance she hadn't fully anticipated. I realized that while she would never fully abandon her need to control, this particular gathering had ended differently than she had planned. My presence, my awareness, and my ability to assert myself had altered the course of the evening. As the evening wound down, people began to leave, saying their goodbyes with smiles that were no longer edged with subtle condescension. Daniel and I remained near the doorway, gathering our coats and exchanging small jokes that reflected the genuine connection we had nurtured throughout the evening. Even in the face of orchestrated tension, I felt a quiet sense of pride, not from winning a battle, but from maintaining integrity and presence in a situation designed to undermine me. My mom lingered briefly, her smile still polite but now lacking the sharp precision it had earlier, and I knew she understood that her attempts to manipulate me had not succeeded this time. Once the house emptied and the quiet returned, Daniel and I sat together in the car for a few minutes, the engine off, the streets calm. He turned to me and expressed relief at the way I had handled the evening, admitting he had been unsure how to navigate the subtle currents of family dynamics. I reassured him that we had done well, and that our approach, calm, confident, and unflustered, had allowed us to reclaim control without escalating into confrontation. It was a quiet victory, one that didn't require overt conflict, yet its impact was profound. Driving away, I reflected on the entire experience. I understood now that my mom's behavior, her need to orchestrate and manipulate, was not a reflection of my value or Daniel's. It was about control and perception, not reality. By refusing to allow ourselves to be pawns, by maintaining clarity and connection, we had disrupted the cycle and preserved our dignity. I felt lighter, stronger, and more aware of the subtle ways family dynamics could affect perception. More importantly, I had learned that presence and assertiveness, even when subtle, could dismantle even the most meticulously planned attempts at manipulation. That Thanksgiving remained one of the most challenging yet formative experiences of my adult life. It taught me to trust my instincts, to recognize manipulation even when it is cloaked in smiles and compliments, and to assert myself in ways that maintain integrity without escalating conflict. Daniel and I left the house that night not only relieved but bonded, having navigated the subtle war of familial expectations together. I understood that while my mom might always seek control, I now had the tools to engage with her on my own terms, to protect my self-respect, and to preserve the relationships that truly mattered without being trapped in her games. The lessons from that day lingered, shaping how I approached future gatherings, holidays, and family interactions. I knew I could face manipulation with awareness, strength, and grace. And while my mom's penchant for control would never entirely disappear, I had discovered the power of standing firm, of reclaiming my narrative, and of supporting those I cared about in navigating situations designed to undermine them. Thanksgiving had become a testament to resilience, awareness, and the quiet victories that define how we engage with family, love, and ourselves.